It's a Saturday, it's 11 a.m, so it has to be another Badminton Talk podcast, broadcast from Dublin and beamed all over the world to all our Badminton fans and followers. Hi Mark, how are you doing?
Hi John Noble, I'm fantastic. What about yourself?
Doing fantastic. It's March, vaccine's been rolled out, the evenings are getting a little stretch in the evening marks, and COVID case numbers are falling. It's not too bad, Mark.
Yeah, I'm starting to get a little bit of optimism. I think maybe September we could be back, John. I can't wait.
We could be back, indeed. Oh, we are in for a treat today.
Who's on?
Well, we have a legend, Mark, a legend that has agreed to volunteer his time. It's a he. So Mark, I'm going to give you a little bit of a clue. Is that okay? Just to
yeah, come on. Tell me. I'm excited. Legend.
Okay, that is my clue, Mark. Today's...
Okay, that's Manchester United song, yeah, okay. John.
Well, I want you to put your...
You're going to have to give me more clues here, John. I'm struggling.
Okay, today's profile person, what I would classify as a baby boomer when the person was born, graced the badminton courts, particularly during the 80s, represented his province Ulster and Ireland, and he won 3 national senior titles. Perhaps he won more, but I have it down on the record as 3. 2 mixed, one in 87, one in 91 with Holly Lane. Then she was a Connolly. Also back in 91, won a men's double national senior title with, of course, we know, Michael O'Mara, the legend too. But our profile player also represented Northern Ireland at the Commonwealth Games, Brisbane in 1982 Games, Edinburgh in 1986, and Auckland, if I'm right, in 1990. So... Okay, so...
Some big names from Ulster Badminton back in the 80s. I remember Bill Thompson. I remember Geordie Stevens, Graham Henderson. There were a lot of big names, but I think our guest, given with Alex Ferguson, was the manager of Manchester United. I'd say this is Peter Ferguson.
Yes, it is Peter Ferguson. Peter, how are you?
I'm good, boys. Thanks very much. I was starting to wonder there if I played the right sport and played for Man United.
I'm sure you got the connection early, Peter, there. A name with Ferguson. No. There can't be such a famous name.
Great introduction, guys.
Okay, well, look, Peter, thank you so much for volunteering to share with our listeners, your story, your badminton story. As you know, Peter, we all have a story to tell. And I hope our listeners to the podcast today really enjoy going down a bit of memory lane, sharing stories. Some of the new generation won't be familiar with. But Peter, just before we get stuck into the questions, we know the format. I start, Mark starts. We kind of dark questions. How are you doing with COVID as we pass a year of a milestone? Have you been jabbed yet?
Funny you should say that, John. Yeah, it's been difficult times, but I got my vaccination yesterday, as I am now over the 60-year-old bracket, which is scary. But yes, I got it yesterday, so wee bit sore today, but it's not as bad as what people are talking about it, So it's difficult up here. As you know, I was a school teacher, retired, and I'm trying to help the kids, big anxiety problems. But touch wood, everybody is doing here, the family's doing well and everything else. So, the sooner we get over this, the better, and get back to playing sport and watching sport. Be great.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Peter. We all have to kind of keep our fingers crossed. Lockdown is finally over. We're gradually going to get back to normality and start doing the things we've taken for granted. So, Mark, you know Peter, yeah?
Oh, I know Peter well. He's a legend in Ulster Badminton. Yeah, very skillful, particularly mixed doubles. I always, well, you were a very good men's doubles player, but I'm not, we'll find out later which was your favourite game.
Yeah, let's hold back the questions for our listeners.
That's true.
So anyway, listen, welcome to everyone, and thanks to, of course, the Q Shuttle for sponsoring this podcast. Peter, let's kind of start at the beginning if we can. Question number one. How did you get into this amazing sport of badminton, and how old were you back in the day when you did start?
Gosh, we're going back a long time here, John.
Yeah.
My family were into the sport. My father in particular he actually played Irish League football for Coleraine. He played off a handicap of 2 at Port Stewart.
Oh, God.
And he encouraged me to play all sports. So, as a young boy, you used to leave the house at 9 o'clock in the morning. Your parents didn't see you. It would start. Times were great. I played football. At my primary school in Melbourne. And I was captain of the football team and won the cup. So, football was what I wanted to play. But I played golf and I played cricket. I played anything at all. But when I went to Korean Inst, the grammar school, my brother George was, he's 6 years older than me. He was playing a lot of badminton at that time and also a lot of rugby. At school, you had to play rugby. You didn't have a choice. And I was quite small in those days. But my brother suggested going to the badminton club, which was held on Fridays. And I went along there and thoroughly enjoyed it. And I got hooked in the game. But in those days, we used to play in a school gym, with the low swinging beams, which made it interesting. But no, I played my first game for Korean Inst. I played 4th singles and 2nd men's doubles, and I lost. And I remember in the change rooms sitting crying my eyes out, and my brother came down and comforted me and said, "Come on, you have to enjoy it." Blah blah blah. So it was my brother really that got me started into it, and my dad always encouraged me, as my mum did. So that's where it all started.
Brilliant. And before Mark asks a quick question, were you left-handed at the golf as well as the badminton?
No, I'm a wee bit strange in that.
Sorry, no, I picked up on that one.
No, I was right-handed playing cricket, playing golf.
Wow.
Played badminton left-handed, but in recent years I've been playing in Bangor Golf Club, and I play right-handed until I get to the green and I putt left-handed. So we're got one out.
Wow, my God.
It's funny, actually. It's funny because my parents were both right-handed, yet my brother played left-handed and I played left-handed as well. And we don't know where badminton came from. I certainly got it from my brother George, but we delved back and found out that one of my grandparents played a bit of table tennis.
Ah, okay.
So but I don't know, because I was wondering where it came from, but that's the closest connection we could get. It was just sport, any sport at that time.
Yeah. How times have changed. Fantastic. Okay, great, interesting insight to you as you began this exciting journey. Mark, you want to?
Yeah, I've got question number 2 for Peter. Peter, what was your first badminton club, and how old were you when you joined?
Well, back in the day, and Mark, you would know this very well, and John, I'm sure you've heard, Korean and District had a very strong badminton leagues. Yeah. That stretched right up the Londonderry, Drumahoe, you name it. It was very, very strong in those days, and I joined a club called First Coleraine, and it was at Church Hall, and I would have been about 12. And we played in the Korean District. At that time, it was known as a minor league. And my first game for them was in minor D league. I played 2nd men's doubles and 4th mixed. And it was played in a church hall called Derry Keegan.
Good God.
Just outside Ballymoney.
I know it.
The hall was so small that this is true story now. The back lines were painted up the back wall. And at one end, there was a fire.
Oh, God.
Because it was cold in those days. we used to hit the shuttle into the fire and you got a point for it, but you never seen the shuttle again.
I was going to ask you that question. Was that a legal shot?
Yeah, it counted as a point. But, yeah, so they ended up putting the fire guard on, but it was still in the court, believe it or not. So that's where I learned my badminton. And the big thing about badminton in those days was the suppers. Because the men brought sandwiches and the ladies brought sticky buns, as we called it. So you always look forward to the supper in those days.
Oh, God.
But I would have been about 12 years of age.
Yeah.
So
that was obviously quite a late night if you were playing badminton. You'd only one court.
Oh, yeah.
You had the old badminton rules, Peter. I remember
the old rules.
So
that's right.
The current crop is spoilt. It's short rules, game's over real quick.
Yeah.
You could have been there from 8 in the evening till 2 in the morning time or something like that in that parish hall?
Sometimes, yeah. But when I was playing at that age, they usually put the younger people on first to get us away for school the next day. But as I progressed, I remember we used to play tournaments in Oma. And I was getting in at 2 or 3 in the morning and then getting up and going to school the next day, which was crazy. But you're quite right.
Yeah. Wow, Peter. Very interesting. So, look, I'd like to remind all our listeners to this podcast, we are profiling the legend Peter Ferguson, multinational senior title specialist in, well, hopefully he'll tell us later on, is it mixed, is it doubles, was it even singles? I'm not sure. But it's great to have Peter today. Peter, obviously coaches play a huge role in players' development. Who were your first coaches? And can you remember what they taught you? Now that's going back.
Well, in school we had 4 members of staff: Mr. Mackay, Mr. Blair, and Mr. Gilmore, and then there was a Mr. Jim Flanagan who was actually head of French. And they weren't really what I would call coaches at the time, but they took the clubs, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, different age groups, obviously, but they would have taught us the basic rules. But we used to bring in a gentleman who had a big influence on me, was George Henderson.
Yes.
The Henderson family was very big up in that area. Like George, he was a badminton international. There was Noel Henderson, who was, back in those days, you would have double internationals. Like in the winter, you would have a badminton international or rugby international, and in summer, then there would be a cricket international. So the demands there. Not unlike today, like you could get away with it doing it back there. Yeah. But they owned Huey and Henderson Sports Shop.
Oh, right, yeah.
And he came in now and he coached us once a week. And I always remember him. One of the first things he taught us was footwork and keep your head up as you're lunging forward to the net. I remember that. And the other thing, which was quite advanced in those days when we played other schools, was rotation doubles.
Right, yes.
The person at the back basically takes a shuttle, the guy at the front, he runs the net, so you keep on the attack. But we were taught badminton in a hall that had a very low ceiling and beams. So that's where my touch, I wasn't a big hitter of the shuttle, I was more touch and play around like a game of chess. So he taught us what angles to use, and I don't know why, and maybe Mark might know as well, with Bruce being so good, left-handers seem to get better angles.
Yeah,
John McEnroe used to say that, but I don't know what the reason was. And the other advantage was people would throw it up your backhand, but the next thing they could hit in the face with it because it was up your forehand. That was always worth a few points. But no, he was very influential at the start, and we used to play a lot of school matches, and I came up against my old mate back in those days, Ricky Kay.
Oh, yes, that's a name I remember.
And Ricky and me formed a great relationship, but I could never beat Ricky, and then he told me how to play him, and I beat him, and I never looked back since. But
you still friends with him now?
Well, I hardly ever see him, to be honest. People say that once you stop playing a sport, you lose. You lose what was the common denominator. It's a shame because we live in different parts of the province, and but we'll probably go on to Ricky later. He was a big influence on how we played doubles, etc. But no, him, George Henderson, a lot. and he looked after me with rackets and stuff like that in the early days, so yeah, he did a lot for us.
You remember your first rackets? They weren't wooden, were they?
They were wooden, yes.
Were they?
Certainly are.
We were just talking about that before we come on air.
You'll probably know what they were. A Dunlop Max Ply 0.5.
Yes, I remember them.
The big wooden presses.
Yeah.
That's going back the day. Good God.
The next racket I had after that was a Yonex. I think it was a B8000. It was the green one. Green head and a silver shaft. That was the first metal racket I had.
Golly.
And then I moved on to the one I stayed with for a long, long time. Because I got Yonex sponsoring me when I was 17. It was a massive deal of half-price racket, half-price shirt, and half-price pair of shorts. That was my first deal. And then I moved to Carton, and I was with Carton for over 20 years, coaching and all. And the racket I used there was the 3.7X, the one with a flattened shaft?
Yes, yeah.
And then I tried the 3.7S, which was the red one, the graphite shaft.
Yeah. I hope we're all listening to Peter here now. This is a very important detail. Come on, Peter, yeah.
If you want to, they're probably in the British Museum by now, I think, these rackets. But no, I used that, and I always went back to the 3.7X because it was a wee bit heavier.
Yeah.
As I said earlier, me being a touch player, it worked out. But and then the other one we tried was a Carton 85-gram racket.
Oh, golly.
Because when it was sponsored by Carton, after the games, we used to get our photographs taken, or if we did TV interviews, there was no point, they said, in me showing the 3.7X, because they didn't make them anymore.
No.
So I used to swap and hold the latest racket for them. But I think in the day, there was only another player myself in the UK were using. It was Ian Pringle of Scotland.
Yeah,
I remember Ian.
Yeah, he was a good player. So we both used the 3.7X, great racket.
Yeah,
and the other thing then later on was I got sponsored by, and John, you would know these guys, Nick Good, Ashaway.
Oh yeah, Nick Good, yes, absolutely. Andy Good and Nick Good, yes.
They sent me rolls and rolls of string.
Brilliant.
They were very good to me as well.
Oh, big shout out to Ashaway.
Strings.
Yeah. And Peter, what racket would you say now, if you look at your screen at the moment, if I can just play this clip, do you think you were playing? Our listeners will have to use their little bit of their, if you can see this rally here, Peter. Obviously the sound, I'll keep quiet for a second for our listeners. That was the old 3.7X. That was the old tree. We're looking at Peter Ferguson here with Holly Lane, and Dan Travers on the other side of the court. We will post this on. We'll post this on social media. We'll just show one more point in
7-8 second server.
Yeah, show the next point because no, it's not. See, it's 7.
Okay, so Peter, that's a little clip from there. I'll show you a little clip of later where you actually won that set. But so what?
That's scary.
Yeah, you were.
I've hair in all those days.
Well, I'll tell you, Peter, you were such a tricky player watching you play some of those mixed shots. The way you cut the shot from right to left hand side of the court, it was going straight forward. Next minute was going across, and again, we'll probably talk about this a little bit more in the podcast about your performances on some of those in some of those tournaments. But Mark, you were going to ask the next question here to our listeners from on the Badminton Talk podcast here, sponsored by the Q Shuttle.
Yeah, I'll do question 5 and question 6.
Great.
Peter, what age did you start taking badminton very seriously? And also, I suppose, like follow-up questions, that did you play in any Ulster underage teams when you were growing up?
Yeah, well, as I say, I played a lot of school badminton, and the school's badminton was singles and boys doubles, and then in the club it was more men's doubles and mixed doubles. But I suppose you could say I started taking seriously Round about 15, 16 years of age. I'd been getting good results, and but this might be a wee bit controversial because it was outside Belfast and Lisburn and lived in Coleraine. It took me a wee bit longer sort of to get recognised. I had to keep beating people to get recognised.
You were the outsider, Peter, were you? Is that what you're saying?
Well, it was about, a wee bit, yeah, I was a country bumpkin, as they used to call it back in the days, you know.
Okay.
We used to come in and go, hey, boy, hey, you know, and all that. But,
Okay.
you know, it was difficult, but I was determined to break into it, and my dad, who gave me loads of advice, because as I said, he was very sporty, would say to me, look, you have a choice. You can either give up or you keep fighting, and eventually they'll recognise you. And he said it's not in your nature to give up. So, you know, that's a wee piece of advice to any kids. You know, I have youngsters at school who are very good footballers, and they were invited to play at an Irish League team, you know, to train with them. But they didn't get picked the first night or the second night, so they never went back.
Yeah.
So I would say to them, if I turned up to your club as a stranger, would you put me on? They said, no, we don't know you. I said, exactly. So you have to fight for your place. And I think that also develops character as much as anything else. So in many ways,
definitely,
you know, I learned a lot of life skills through my badminton.
At a young age, Peter. Yeah, at a young age. Sorry, I cut across you there, Peter, which was really very impactful.
With the help of my dad and said George Henderson, but you know, I played the first represented back then was Ulster under 16s, and I was selected for that. And I see John, your daughter and son, go across still, I think, to Nottingham.
That's right. Yes, they one of their favourite places.
That was my first representative under 16s in the schools. Now it was then just against Wales, Scotland, and England. Now my claim to fame was I won 7 out of 8 matches, which was really, really pleased with. And I thought to myself, you know, I have a chance of being pretty good at this.
Yeah, that's a
compliment. My father always said I picked the wrong sport, because there's no money on the badminton. I should have played golf, but I wouldn't have made the bracket. But you know, I played Ulster under 16s. I then played Ulster under 18s. I played what was known then as an Ulster junior team. I don't think it's about interprovincial.
Right.
I then represented Irish under 18s. I represented Irish under 21s, and then Irish B international, and then I was fortunate enough, you know, to obviously get on the full international team. But I would say Nottingham schools under 16, and then when I got to about 18, I went to university to study PE, and
wow,
the one I think that made the breakthrough for me was the inter-counties. You know, going across and playing those county matches, they were you know, it was hard work. That was hard.
It was a different level.
That's what.
Yeah, it was a different level.
That was a different level. But we used to, believe it or not, get the Liverpool boat on a Friday night, sleep overnight, because of the troubles and the unsettlement. We played our home matches in Birkenhead and Liverpool.
Yes.
Believe it or not. So we'd arrive in Liverpool about 6 in the morning, get a bus, play a match on Saturday afternoon, stay in a hotel, play a match on Sunday, get the ferry home on Sunday night, and I would get off the boat and go straight to university on Monday morning.
Unbelievable! Wow,
yeah,
what a commitment!
But that was what turned me into a reasonable player.
Yeah. But you had, Peter, you had that perseverance factor. And also, you know, like just because, you know, a match doesn't go my way and I don't win it, I don't just all of a sudden not go back. I actually learn from it. I go back tougher, stronger, and almost, you know, you, it seems like at a young age you kind of almost knew the process you were going through, because at no stage did you ever think of, you know, throwing the towel in.
No, well, the first priority was enjoyment.
Yeah.
You know, I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I had a lot of good people around me. You know, the problem then was getting from Coleraine to Belfast. So we'd get trains, and there was another friend that I played badminton with, Mark, I remember him as Billy Cameron.
Right, yeah.
Billy used to drive me, you know, he used to drive me everywhere as well. And he was a good player, and we played he played in the Irish team as well, but eventually, you have to persevere. If it doesn't work out, I was a great one of reviewing and say what could do better and what I needed to improve upon, but at the same time, back in the day, I had to learn, as they called it, the killer instinct.
Yeah.
Because there were things happening, and I was just letting it go. But to survive, you had to learn to survive. But then the guys that we were playing against, they were tough. They were tough guys in the Irish squad, the big squad. So they taught me a lot as well. But it was. It was about improving your own performance, really.
Yeah. Sponsored by the Q Shot Tub Badminton Talk podcast. We are here talking to Peter Ferguson, a legend in the game of badminton from Ulster, represented Ireland, particularly during the decade of the 80s. Mark, you have a question or a reply comment to Peter?
Yeah, no, I was just following up on something Peter said. I thought was very interesting. I think the current Ulster team play in, I think it's Premier B of the English inter-county setup. But I have a memory that I think Ulster badminton was very strong in the 80s and might have been in the top league in your time, Peter. And I was just fascinated to hear about some of the guys you played against in Liverpool and probably Lancashires and Yorkshires.
That's right.
But who was in the team?
The big one at the time, I think, was Cheshire.
Right.
They were very, very strong, and most of them, to be honest, were English internationals.
Yeah.
But it was hard. Like, there were singles, there was doubles, and there was mixed, and it was full on. But they were hard quality matches. Mike Cattermole, Ray Wolf. Just a few of the names I can remember, like in those days you had...
Who was in the Ulster?
But they played a different one. There was Mike Tredget, who was one of my heroes, like being a left-hander, All England. Dave Eddy, of course, there was the great Ray Stevens and Kevin Jolly and people like that. Now, we didn't come up against them at the time, but, the standard was high, and as I said to you before, you didn't want to go out and make a fool of yourself. You had to play to survive.
Yeah.
If you wanted to play the game. But I learnt so much there, not only, on the court, but, off the court preparation, blah, 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 warm-ups, cool-downs, eating even, because I remember one of the best tournaments in Ireland at the time was the Irish Juniors.
Yes, right, yeah.
Yes.
And there was literally millions played in it. You never get off court.
Took a month to play, did it?
Oh, it was unbelievable. Like, I played all three events, and I remember starting on a Friday night at 7:00, finishing at 11:30, and then go back in the morning, start again at 9, and then you came off court. Maybe if you were lucky, you keep progressing to 6:00, and then the final started at 7. But I remember the problem was, I'd come off my men's doubles, and then I was called to play the mixed, and I didn't eat properly. I was just taking fluid on board, and I remember playing. I can't remember who my partner was, but I went back to hit an overhead, and I remember waking up in the bar upstairs, and they were putting sugar in the side of my mouth, and I came around and I had passed out because I hadn't eaten anything. I didn't look after myself, didn't take enough, and then I had to play in the two finals in half an hour. So you had to learn to find a way to eat and drink while playing, which was a hard way of learning. But after that, then I made sure, I literally forced it, to make sure that I was eating properly. So things like that stood me in stead later on.
Yeah, when you think of the players today that are playing in the National Indoor Arena or wherever their academy is in their countries, they're getting so much guidance on nutrition, on strength and conditioning. Of course, the technical, the tactical, the mental. It's like you had to go and pretty much find out all these things yourself through almost making a mistake and not knowing them and been a bit ignorant, and then acquiring those skills. But by goodness, you toughened yourself up in the process, Peter. So the time you were playing, obviously, I mean, yeah, it seems probably to someone in their teens or 20s a long time ago, back in the 80s, relatively speaking, we know it's not as far back as then. But there was many people in your life, in perhaps on the badminton court and off the badminton court, that influenced you. But anyone in particular who might have been your biggest influence on your badminton journey? Can you identify some?
Well, I played a lot of matches with people. You're quite right. Back in the day, we didn't have nutritionists, dietitians, physios, and to be honest with you, we really didn't have much of a coach. You sort of had to analyse it yourself and get on with it. But whenever I played, I'm gonna mention a lot of names here to you, and hopefully a lot of your listeners will know who they were. But I was brought up in this era, and they were hard players. They were tough players, but they taught me an awful lot. And as I said to you before, breaking through, some of them took me under their wing and looked after me. Billy Cameron was brilliant in Coleraine. He was very, very fast over the court, but he drove me everywhere. But the ones in Belfast, and Mark will know all these names, and you'll know them as well, John, was Bill Thompson.
Yeah.
Clifford McElwain.
Yeah.
They were a great men's doubles pair. Fraser Evans.
Yeah, that name now rings a bell. I did.
He was.
Yeah.
He played mixed with a legend that I had total and utter respect for, Mary Dinah.
Okay, big shout out for them. Yeah, absolutely worth a round of applause to them, Peter. I can see you smiling on the podcast there, having done that. Big shout out for them. Yeah, I'm just trying to prove I can use the technology too.
There's Fraser and Mary. I have a funny story I'll tell you about Mary Dinah later, because I played my first mixed international with Mary Dinah against India. But I'll come to it later.
Okay.
Brian McKay, better known as Buns.
And he's playing on the Masters circuit. Sorry, Peter.
He's still playing.
Yeah, he's still playing. Go ahead. Sorry, Peter.
John Scott. They were all great doubles specialists, and the rivalry between those boys was unbelievable on court. And of course, on the female side, you had Barbara Beckett.
Yeah.
I think Barbara was one of the first players to go really full time. You had Mary Dinah, already mentioned, Wendy Orr.
Wendy Orr, yes, that's another name, yeah.
And then, of course, just slightly after that was Diane Underwood, singles player. And, of course, on the coaching side of things, and people that were involved in the Irish setup at that time would have been, fond memories of Joe Kincaid.
Yes, oh, absolutely, yeah.
Manager and coach,
yeah. Lennox Robinson.
Yeah, I remember him.
And then the other one that helped out an awful lot was we know him as Wilkie, was Winston Wilkinson. Wilkie, as we called him. Mary Bryan was about at the time. There's a lot of names there, but they would have, they taught me to toughen up. As they said to me, you needed the killer instinct. I remember a funny story where one of them, I was playing in singles and I hit it down the line and it was in by about 6 inches, and they just say, out.
God.
And I'd go, what? They said it was out. And he did it about 3 or 4 times on me. And I thought, well, if I don't pull this up here, I'm in trouble. So he served it and I left it, and it was in about a foot. And I just went out. And he said it wasn't out. I says, well, are you going to play fair or,
Yeah.
And he goes, fair enough. Now I thought that afterwards, if I hadn't checked that up, he would have been beating me. There would have been no part of the court that was out.
Yeah, there was no cameras in those days, Peter, where there are kind of replay.
No, there was no umpires either, or no linesmen really,
Golly.
But as I say, there's a funny story about one of them. I won't mention any names because every time I played against them, I couldn't understand it. Never lost a toss. In those days you spun your racket.
Right.
And in the racket, you had a wee bit of string at the bottom, which kept the strings together. It's called trebling. Hopefully, you'll all remember it.
Yes.
But he never lost the toss. And I thought, every time we played him, he always won the toss. Mm-hmm. So anyway, I started playing. I was supposed to play an international with him. And he said to me before we started, what do you want to do? Do you want to serve or do you want sides or what? I said, well, we'll wait and see whether we win the toss or so. And he goes, well, we'll always win the toss. Always. I says, how do you know that? And little did I know, but when he spun his racket, if the opposition or whoever it was said rough, when you rubbed your hand along the treble, and one side was rough and the other side was smooth, obviously.
Yes.
But he had rough at the bottom and smooth. But at the top of the racket, he had more trebling, which was not heard of in those days. He only had it usually at the bottom.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
So the bottom he had smooth, and at the top he had rough. So he never lost the toss. But after that, every time I played him, we used a coin or something else because I wouldn't let him spin his racket. But those guys are great, and Joe Kincaid was very, very good as well. He was very good to me as well.
Yeah, he was a big name in the game for a while, Joe Kincaid.
A long time.
He was always at the big tournaments, at all tournaments, north and south, and other parts. And he
was big in football, soccer. Joe Kincaid.
He was the goalkeeper for Linfield for a long, long time.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
He used to joke about his nose. That's why his nose was a funny shape, because as goalkeepers, he said we had to be mad. But Joe was very good with me. I roomed with him in '82 in Australia, and we arrived in Australia, and his feet had swollen that much that he couldn't get his shoes on for the fortnight. We used to joke about that. But no, he would have done anything for the players.
Yeah.
He was a gentleman, a lovely man.
He was a real players' man, I always thought.
Yeah, lovely man.
Yeah.
And then Audrey, of course, was fighting for everything. She was great at promoting the game as well. Audrey was a great name in the badminton as well.
That's right.
But,
wow.
But yeah.
So, Peter, that's how you got tough. Full stop. That made you tough. Yeah.
Well, I didn't have a choice.
Yeah.
I didn't have a choice. I had to, otherwise, there's a story going back that my dad used to say to me when I was younger. I used to lose my temper quite a bit.
Well,
and he said to me, I thought I would, I broke a racket once. I don't mind admitting to it. I was about 13.
Yeah.
And he said to me, I thought I was going to get banned from playing or whatever. But he said to me, that's a sign of weakness. And I went, I don't know what you mean. He says, when you lose your temper, you're showing the opposition they're getting to you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So he said, you suck it up and you get on with it. And that has stood me through badminton and also in the teaching career when I wanted to string somebody up by the neck. I would think back and say, you don't lose it. So the only time was when you were getting frustrated with your own play. But that's the lesson in life to anybody,
That
it was
is
an interesting slant.
That is a fantastic bit of advice to any of our listeners, particularly our juvenile listeners on the Badminton Talk podcast sponsored by the Q Shuttle. So, Mark, you have a question. We're asking Peter another question along our list. I'm not sure which number we're on now. We're really...
we're down to number 8, so I'll shoot ahead here, John.
Okay, great.
Peter, when did you start playing for the full Irish team? Do you remember your first match? Who were your partners? And who did you play against?
Jeez,
and just a follow-up, how many times did you play for Ireland?
Oh, yeah. Well, my first game, I was very fortunate. I was really, really fortunate. I was unlucky at the start, and then I was very lucky in the end how I made my debut. But I was called up 3 times over a period of a year. But once I was ill, couldn't play.
Yeah.
Secondly, I'd injured my shoulder, couldn't play. And the third time, I thought, this is it. I was supposed to play men's doubles with Fraser Evans in Wales. And the day before the match, it was cancelled because the sponsors pulled out. And I thought to myself, I am not going to get my debut here, because it was a big, big thing to do that. Because I had watched these boys playing in Coleraine Town Hall when I was 14.
Yeah, yeah.
And to reach that level, was incredible. And I thought, it's not going to happen. But unfortunately for two other boys, for the Helvetia Cup in 1981, it was in Norway. And John Taylor,
Yes.
the team was Bill Thompson, Clifford McElwain, Fraser Evans, Colin Bell.
Yeah.
Yes.
Wow.
John Taylor, and the ladies were Diane Underwood, Mary Brand, and Wendy Orr, and the two coaches, Lennox Robinson and Joe, was the manager, Joe Kincaid.
Yeah.
So that was okay. Unfortunately, John Taylor took ill, and then Brian McKee was called up, but he couldn't get off work. So I was in bed on a Saturday morning, and I remember the phone ringing, and my mum, of course, there was no mobiles in those days.
No.
The mum said, "Phone call here for you, Peter. It's Audrey Kincaid." I'll never forget it, because she said to me, "Look, John Taylor has called off, and Brian McKee, would you be available to go to the Helvetia Cup and play third singles?" I'm like, "Yeah, of course I am." But I felt sorry for the two boys. But anyway, afterwards, because we ended up winning that, which we've never done before.
That's
and
incredible.
I thought to myself, to go to the Helvetia Cup, I was, 20 years of age, and to actually win the thing was amazing. And I thought, after that, what a way to make your debut. But I was so fortunate, to be honest with you. My first game was against Iceland.
Yeah.
Very nervous, extremely nervous. We used to exchange pins, badges.
Yes. Yeah.
I dropped my badge on the floor, and I couldn't pick it up. I was chasing it, and the big Icelandic guy came over and lifted it and gave it to me, and he went, "First cap?" Yes. But Lennox and Joe were standing beside me, talking me through it. "Remember, you're playing all this." All I remember is when the shuttle went up in the air, I was hitting it down. I hit everything. I didn't play any touch shot. I just smacked it.
Yeah.
And I was lucky enough, I beat him in two sets.
Oh, fantastic.
And then we played Austria. I won that game. I lost the game against Wales. They had a Chinese guy, YC Lim, who was very good. And then the fourth cap was the final.
Wow.
And it was played in an auditorium with a stage with all the seats around it.
Yes.
And I vaguely remember they had a grand piano.
My God.
And the guy would play, a song whenever we were walking up in court. But it was live on TV, because it was the host nation. We were playing in the final. Bill Thompson played a game, a singles 3-setter, and there was blood coming out of his shoes. They were dyed. He never gave up. He won. Bill and Clifford won their doubles. Mary Brand and Wendy Orr won their ladies doubles. I did all right in the first set, but I was getting pretty hammered in the second set. I think it was about 14-2 down, and somebody from the Irish team shouted to the guy on the piano, "You better play something here. It'll give us something to listen to rather than watching this." And then Fraser and Mary won the last game, and we won the Helvetia Cup.
Oh my God. Oh wow, we just have to cut it there, Mark. We literally have 60 seconds trying to squeeze everything in. Peter Ferguson, my goodness, what a character, Mark.
Yeah, it's some tremendous stories, John. But isn't it, there's a theme developing in these podcasts, how important your parents are, and how important it is to have friends who drive you around the country, and just fantastic stories. Peter's he's got a great memory of his younger days in badminton.
He has an incredible memory of his younger day, and we are, Mark, unfortunately so out of time because we squeezed everything in. So we're going to hear more from Peter Ferguson next week, maybe 2 parts, who knows, it all depends, Mark. So we want to thank all our listeners listening to the Badminton Talk podcast brought to you by the Q Shuttle. Mark, 10 seconds, doing anything nice this weekend?
This weekend, I'm actually maybe flying a drone, John.
Flying a drone. My goodness, Mark. We'll wait to hear from you next week. Until next Saturday, Mark. See you then.
Take care.